given that, the definitions we have here, what do we know? And I'll warn you that I will probably, after you guys go, I'll probably comment on this myself. But let's start with Chris, because you're a numbers guy. You've been actually defining the methodologies that have been used to try and get a sense of this. What is the prevalence of this at this point? What is our best estimate? What do we know about the prevalence of sexual assault and even rape on campuses today?
I don't know if my statistics professors would call me a numbers guy,
Yeah.
but I work with a bunch of numbers people. So a lot of decades of research has been done on the prevalence and nature of sexual assault among college populations. About 10 years ago, we did a study for the National Institute of Justice, and one of the statistics that was gleaned from that study was that 1 in 5 women will be sexually assaulted while they're in college. We did that study at 2 schools. It certainly wasn't meant to be a nationally representative statistic, but it in fact represented the experiences of senior undergraduate women at those 2 schools. And that 1 in 5 figure really started to kind of take on a life of its own. Last couple of years, there's been a renewed interest in understanding the magnitude and nature of this problem. And we did a new study, much larger, that was published in January, called the Campus Climate Survey Validation Study. And there's been many other studies done, and a lot of them have been done using different methods and different definitions and at different universities, but a lot of these studies are now arriving, I think, at pretty similar numbers. Just to give you an idea, in our latest study, we worked with 9 colleges and universities all around the country, public, private, large, small. We collected surveys from 23,000 undergraduates, 15,000 women, and 8,000 men. On average, we wanted to understand the prevalence of sexual assault as well as rape and sexual battery during the 2014-2015 academic year, so only like a 7 or 8 month reference period. On average, across those schools, women experienced, 10.3% of undergraduate women experienced a completed sexual assault during the academic year. About 6% experienced sexual battery, and about 4% experienced a completed rape. But what was most evident from the research is that it really varies. So we had one school on one end of the spectrum where the sexual assault prevalence rate was 4%, and on the other end of the spectrum, it was 20%. So we had a school where 20% of the undergraduate women at that school had been sexually assaulted during the academic year. About 6.5% of them had been raped during the academic year. So what we see is that the prevalence, I mean, a national estimate, what a headline might be is, maybe 1 in 4, 1 in 5 will be sexually assaulted while they're in college. A lot of studies are finding that. But perhaps more importantly, what we're finding is that it really depends on the institution, and it really varies from one school to the next. And that's why we think it's so important that schools have an individual level understanding of the prevalence and nature of sexual assault among their students.
Anybody want to add to that, or? Okay, all right. Yep. Before we do that, we may reference, and in my book, in fact, I reference FSU. I think it's really important to understand that FSU is not unique. I mean, what we're doing is we use this as a frame of reference to try and think about how to address the problem. I use FSU, and I'm very clear, because what I was able to do as I learned more stories, my students, and I got to know them better and what was happening, I was able to connect dots in ways that I could not have done it before. So it's important that when we talk about FSU, we're not doing this to say FSU is worse than any other university or better than any other university. It's really to provide more insight into the nature of the problem and hopefully get to the point where we can do something about it.
As far as FSU specific numbers, and I appreciate your comment on having individualized campus climate surveys on all different institutions, because I really think that helps inform your prevention and your response and your policy, because every institution is different. Students are involved in different things at different colleges. Your size is different. All of those things really play into what your students are experiencing. At FSU, we have been running a national college health assessment survey for probably about a decade. It's just asks a bunch of questions about health, ranging from vegetables to physical activity, including asking questions around power-based personal violence. From that data, we do know about 1.9% of our students at FSU experienced penetration without consent in the past 12 months. That's about 700 students per year, a little bit over. that we know on average at FSU are experiencing this. Our Victim Advocate Program, which is our confidential crisis counseling center at FSU, they worked with 400 cases in the 2015 year in regards to power-based personal violence. That might not be 400 people, but cases. So someone might have multiple victimizations or traumas, so they would continue to work with that person. But those numbers help frame a lot of the work that we do and inform how we approach prevention and response on our campus.
I mean, to me, it was as a I'm not a statistician either. I'm an analyst, an economist, and who uses statistics extensively. One of the things that was a threshold issue for me was when I went from percentage, which is what 1.9%, to numbers, and looking at that from that point of view. So one of the things you'll find in my book, for example, is that I have taken a trauma-centered approach to this because I personally believe, I'm not speaking for anyone else up here, that that's where we have to start and recognize that this problem or this issue and what happens with sexual violence is it creates trauma. And if we don't recognize that, it's going to be very difficult to address. When you're talking about 2%, it seems small. When you're talking about 700 men and women in the last 12 months, there's a lot of harm that's being created because of this kind of behavior.